while I'm known for kind of giving logical arguments, and this will be one as well, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try to make some emotional appeals, and perhaps it'll be a bit more effective.
Sure.
So, do any of you girls who are here have any irrational fears? Are you afraid of things like a irrational fear of spiders, perhaps? Anybody?
Small space.
Yeah, small space. Any other irrational fears?
Heights.
Yeah. Heights, that's an irrational fear. And perhaps you have bad dreams occasionally that give you bad intuitions that are kind of irrational as well. That happens often to women, right? I can see some nodding heads. Well, what if you were to kind of suppose this also? I think that often men are kind of left high and dry on this because we're often kind of looked at as being extremely rational, logical, and I think men are. But they also have irrational fears. And what if it's not a matter that they don't trust you, but it's a matter that they have an irrational fear? That the fear itself perhaps is not a rational one, that you're going to go out and sleep with another guy if you go to a nightclub or something like this, but rather they don't want to have to worry themselves to death with irrational fears, just like with all the irrational fears that you expect them to kind of take care of on your behalf, that you don't want to be tortured with. You want to be comforted so that you don't have to deal with them. Then you would consider that to be a matter of respect. Like, let's say if you had a terrible dream or something like that with a bad intuition, perhaps you just want to be comforted, just like have a hug, right? Have them acknowledge that, hey, even though that fear is kind of silly, don't worry about it, honey. I still love you, and it's no big deal, right? Wouldn't it be the same thing on the other foot? Like, couldn't we grant a little grace towards the irrational fear that men could have when it comes to something like that? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, I think men are very valid.
Maybe it's not completely rational, but just like you want to be comforted and respected for your irrational fears, don't they also deserve that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think at that point it would even be irrational because, you see stuff happen all the time, to girls.
Well, I'm not saying that. I think even irrational fears are based in something of a reality, right? Why are you so afraid of a confined space, for instance? Well, because you envision perhaps getting stuck in it. Or why are you so terrified of heights? Well, because perhaps you envision falling from a great height and that terrifies you. So that's based in a reality. It's just the fear itself is irrational, right? But all those fears are still based in some kind of reality. So because you have these experiences like Brian's talking about in bars where there's a lot of drinking, perhaps you've seen some fights or seen some weird things go down, the chance of that happening with your woman may be very, very, very small. So therefore the fear could be very irrational. But shouldn't there be a little grace granted and a little respect granted to them for also their irrational fears, not just your own?
Yes. Mm. So if you were more of an extrovert and you did like going out, but you didn't want your lady to go out, would you honor what she's saying and say, okay, I won't either? Because men go to the club to hook up with women. Women might go to enjoy attention or this or that, but men go usually specifically because they want to try to engage with women or hook up with women. Like, I could say a bar is different. Guy friends go to a bar, hang out, watch sports, whatever. But clubs specifically, I think men only go with one intention, and it is to try to pursue women to the point of sleeping with them.
Sure. So if you had a man, well, I don't know if you do or not. I'm sorry. I mean, it's just a hypothetical. If you had a boyfriend, husband, whatever, and he wanted to go out to a club, right? And he said, "Honey, you don't trust me," right? You would say, "Yeah, I trust you, but," right? Because you have this fear, right?
Right.
And the fear might not even be rational, completely rational, but wouldn't it be very respectful of him to respect your wishes in that instance and say, "You're right. I'm going to stay home." Why torture your mind with this irrational fear that you have when I can just help you avoid it altogether?
Yeah, for sure. I was just wondering if Brian agreed. Like,
so hang on. So if that happens in reverse then with women, where men say, "I don't want you to go out to a club. I don't want you to go out to these bars. I don't want you." Isn't that also kind of a matter of respect then, that you don't do that on his behalf?
Correct. Yeah, I was agreeing. I was just curious what his ultimate answer was. If his lady said, I don't want either of us to go out to the club, would he respect that? Or is he saying, as the man in the relationship, he's going to say, I don't want you doing this, but I'll decide when and where and how I'll do this. I was just curious if what she was saying he would he would do that in a relationship.
Yeah, so even just to answer your question really quick, even if I was extroverted, I don't think any of my actual rational objections to going out to a nightclub change whatsoever. So like all those stupid things that come with nightlife don't change whether you're introverted or extroverted. There's probably extroverted people who also think nightclubs and parties and bars are dumb as fuck. But in a relationship,
if you were more inclined, like say you do enjoy going to the nightclub, whatever, and she's like, well, if I can't go, I don't want you to go either. Would you?
I think it's fair. Well, okay, like the situation would either be if I did like to go out to the club, it would probably be if I'm putting myself in the position. And is the scenario she's asking me to not go out and she's not going to go out, or?
Well, she basically said
she
like
wants to go out.
You both should honor the same practices essentially.
Yeah.
And if you don't want her to go out, then you shouldn't be able to go out.
Yeah, I guess.
But isn't that revenge?
Sure, I guess.
Like, isn't that revenge against a fear that one person has and the other one doesn't?
I thought it's respect.
Yeah, but no. I would agree with you if you had an irrational fear or something that really would bother you, and that's why you're asking them not to. But what if you don't share the same fear, but then you just demand that they do it anyway? That sounds like revenge.
I mean, I don't see it that way. I'm just saying she just made the point
why wouldn't it be? If you're not actually afraid of it, but if they're afraid of it and you're not, right? It'd be like this. It'd be like, I'm afraid of spiders, so you also, right? Whenever I jump around screaming when a spider comes around, you also need to jump around screaming when a spider comes around. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So it'd be the same thing applied here. If you have this great fear that your partner's going to do X thing, and so that person's going to kind of like assuage that fear. They're going to do what they can to assist you in that by showing you the respect of not making you worry yourself to death. But you don't have the fear which is reciprocal. Then telling them not to do the thing sounds like it's revenge. Like, well, if I can't, then you can't. Like, wouldn't that be the opposite of fairness?
I'll move on after your answer if you have one.
I don't.
Oh, okay. All right, I will move it on. Sina, I'll have you read this one.
The wife that wants to travel to
Go
another
to Twitch, Damien. Go ahead.
country without her husband or to a nightclub with her friend is actually already single. He just doesn't know it yet.
Do you have a response to this?
Yeah, I'm never leaving my husband, so.
Okay.
And can we add some context? Like, we've been best friends for years. I introduced her to her husband, so I know him very well. Like recently, we've had this conversation over the last few years about being able to travel down to Mexico. And now she's been invited to a bachelorette party where no husbands are going. All of the wives or girlfriends or whatever are going as a group. And so should she not be trusted to be cautious and to be careful and to still be allowed to go and enjoy that? I'm
not letting my girlfriend or wife going to a bachelorette party. So
would you go and like hang out nearby?
No, she's just not. She's not going.
So then if you were invited, would you go?
Here, let me paint it like this.
That was what I was getting.
You can go. The relationship is over. It was nice to meet you. We have different values. You're not respecting my boundaries. I'm not going to control you. Mm-hmm. You go ahead and get drunk and have your male stripper. Mm-hmm. That is not conduct.
That's extreme.
That is not conduct conducive to, in my view, in terms of what I want in a partner, to a long-term relationship or a marriage.
Would you have a bachelor party?
No.
Would your wife have a bachelorette party?
I wouldn't. These dudes who get strippers, that's fucking weird.
It's not about strippers. Bachelorette parties are not for only strippers.
Okay, well, look.
Well, then
like you can go,
you know what's crazy?
Go and have no promiscuous activities.
Sure, hang on, sure, you're right. If there's absolutely going to be zero strippers there and you guys are just like hanging out and sewing stuff, then yeah, she can go, sure.
Or just sitting at a resort, just at the pool, where you don't even leave the resort.
That's different. When you say a bachelorette party, right, what comes to mind is not a resort where you're sitting at the pool. What comes to mind is that you're at a male strip club, right? That's what comes to mind.
Or there's
but if you're saying, or there's strippers involved. If you're saying that is not the case, right? And the bachelorette party is, well, me and the girls are just going to get together in the local resort and have some drinks and this and that. Then what would even the problem be there, right? Like, why even bring that up as being something in which would be controlling for somebody to say yes or no to, right? What's even objectionable there?
What do you mean? I'm just saying there's a specific reason and event to go out of the country. Whether they decide to partake in activities that are inappropriate is totally different than trusting your wife to be able to travel safely and come back safely and still make the choices while she's there to not engage in inappropriate activity. That's her choice. That's respect.
We're back to the idea of trust, right? And so the idea is that I don't think it's a breach of trust for somebody to have fears which may not be considered by you to be rational. So, for instance, I'm not in your brain, so I don't know what goes on in your brain. There's a good possibility you're the most trustworthy person on planet Earth, and you know if you go to a place like that you would never do anything like that. But your significant other doesn't know that. They don't know that for sure. They can think it. They can 100% put as much faith in it as they possibly can, but they could still have an irrational fear there, or even in this case, even a legitimate fear. And why not do everything you could to placate that person's fear by something so simple? Something so simple is just, it's not all about me, but also about you too. And if it's all about us and not just me, then if this really bothers you that much, I don't want your brain tortured. I don't want your mind tortured. I don't want you hurting. So I'm going to stay here with you instead. That seems like a great compromise.
But didn't you say that it was revenge?
Well, respond real quick.
I can't agree. I don't agree with you. Like, I think it's one thing to say, oh, I have an irrational fear, but it's another to let irrational fear control how you're going to conduct your relationship and where you go and what you do. Again, I gave a very valid option of, right, like if you feel so strongly that it could be unsafe, travel with her there, stay in the same hotel, allow her to do the things with the group of girls that are not inappropriate, and be there and be a protector for her if that's how strongly you feel.
Remember that all of this is a compromise in her behalf. What's her compromise?
Sometimes relationships are compromises.
Hang on. Let me ask the question. What's the compromise on his behalf? What is she compromising for him in this situation?
She's not the one restricting him.
Yeah. Let her answer the question. We don't need the sisterhood things.
What do you mean?
At
this point, nothing. Like, but at different points in a relationship, you make different compromises.
So hang on. So in this case, in the situation, right? The idea here is he makes all the compromise, you make none.
Hang
on. So the idea here is that, well, then why should he compromise at all? Why not dig in his heels instead and say, no, I don't think you should go, and I don't want you to go. And whether or not you think that that's fair or irrational, I'm going to stick by my guns like you're sticking by yours. That doesn't seem like it's very healthy.
Well, there will be, I'm sure, many other situations where she will have to compromise for him. Maybe this situation, no, but he can make that compromise now, and she can make.
Exactly how a relationship
I feel like
works.
it does
There's all
depend
sorts
on
of
the
compromises.
situation.
All sorts of compromises made across a wide spectrum for all sorts of things. Perhaps she has issues with money. Right? This is a very common thing. Women want to see X amount of money in the bank account for large expenditures, so the man compromises a large expenditure that he wants to make so that she feels that sense of security. That happens all the time in relationships. It's one of the number one reasons people get divorced, in fact, is over money, because they don't want a larger expenditure. Men like to spend on large expenditures. They like to take a little bit more risk with money. Women like to take less risk with money. So a compromise, right? Okay, you can see the fatter bank account. That's great. Okay, but I also don't want you to go gallivanting to Europe, okay, for a bachelorette party. You think you can do that for me? That seems to be a pretty reasonable ask. And it seems like it's very selfish and self-centered to instead say, no, I'm a boss babe, I do what I want, and the compromise only works here one way.
But I didn't say I'm a boss babe and I do what I want. I said there are
I'm not talking about you
options.
specifically.
Either way, for any
Yeah.
woman, if you're rational and you can think and you can say, like, are you willing to do this and make this compromise so that I can be there for this important event? And then obviously prior and later on down the road, I will make compromises for you as well. That's just how relationships work.
Yeah, but you're not going to compromise on the thing that he wants now, right? This is like, in this case, he does all the compromise, you do none, right? Why would this be a deal breaker? Would this be a deal breaker to compromise on this and say?
I mean, I think the compromise would be him attending the bachelorette and being on property while I'm participating in this process, and that is something that we have discussed. So, I can understand. I even feel like I've said this with my partner, that I feel like, his reservations are coming from a place of fear. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think you articulated it well. The compromise for me would be him going with me and traveling to the place that we're going for the bachelorette, and then kind of checking in and out while we do the girls only kind of stuff.
Well, why? Well, wait. I mean, that doesn't assuage the fear. Why? So.
Well, if he's with me, then that does assuage the fear.
No. If he's checking out while you're doing the girls' portion of it, right? That defeats the entire purpose of what creates the fear to begin with.
Can you expand on that?
What's that? Yeah, if you said he checks out while you do whatever the girls' portion is, right?
Yeah, like he wouldn't go to the spa with the girls because he's not
Right.
like it's not
but
co-ed.
But that defeats the purpose. It's what you're doing with the girls that is so concerning, right? That's the problem.
No, it's for him. It's the travel out of the country without him that is the problem.
Well, I mean, in this case, perhaps it's a good enough compromise to say you're going with me to the place. You know what I mean? So that you can see with your own eyeballs, and that in some ways mitigates your fear. Perhaps that's fair enough to do. But I think it's also fair to compromise and just say, well, if this really is such a problem for you, then I just won't go. I just won't go. If it really is something that's going to torture your brain, it's going to torture your mind. Well, even if I don't think it's rational necessarily, I know that you remember that I do all sorts of things that are irrational all the time and have all sorts of fears which are irrational all the time. And, you're pretty understanding about those. So, I'll be understanding about this. And but I think for women often what happens is they only see the compromise on the one side because men generally tend to be so logical, they forget that they also have fears, whether you think they're rational or not.
I definitely see both sides where Andrew's coming from. Like I've been in a situation where, me and my friends were planning on going to Mexico. It ended up not happening anyways, but my boyfriend, he expressed his concerns about my safety, and I don't think it was, like, me personally, I don't think it was controlling in any way, which I think that's a lot of what women think that is like there's being controlling, but like in that situation,
I mean,
he was looking out for my safety.
Let's just assume for a second it is controlling. Like, so what? In relationships, we control each other's behavior all the time. We control our preferences all the time. We control all sorts of things in the behavior of the person that we're with. For the purpose of necessity, we have to do this. People have to control each other, literally, at least to some degree. Otherwise you wouldn't even know what your significant other's preferences were. There's always a segment of control in a relationship. I just think that that's fine. I don't see why that's a big deal exactly.
Yeah.
I think that seems totally reasonable to me. That both sides in a relationship want to have control over different arenas for different reasons, and they have to give and take, right?
I'm going to let a couple chats come in.